You have probably heard a ton about this wonderful thing called a narcissist. And really in the last 5 years, probably, the term gets blasted around. You have probably even been called one if you're driven. Largely misunderstood. And when any of those terms make it into the regular vernacular, particularly if they can be offensive, they're way overused. And actually not even what they are. So my name is Dr. Doug Brackmann. I am a licensed psychologist. I've treated thousands of people. So the very particular brain structure and neurodiversity, and we are often misunderstood and labeled narcissists. Not that many of us aren't. So I'll qualify that and talk to you. But if you're in that boat, just even questioning, what the hell is a narcissist? Hang on, here we go. So I've drawn this picture a bunch of different times, a bunch of different ways, and this one in particular is really good at helping you see what a narcissist is. And so when we first and foremost, the big picture of it, about 80-ish% of people, that's a generous number, have little to no self-awareness. And that means that they are not able to actually step outside of themselves and look at themselves from different angles. And some of that's neurobiology and the book I'm working on, almost done. And a lot of it is just lack of practice or lack of awareness. So I'm hoping this video gives some awareness, particularly when it comes to yourself. So what the hell is self-awareness anyway? And so I give that metaphor and I'll tease it in throughout this, but very simply, it is the ability to look at one's self. And so what the hell does that mean? So draw this picture, describe you, very simple. So at some point in your history, you were in two places at one time. And I always joke about the reason we're on this planet. Why are you on this planet? Very simple. The only truth you know is this, that your parents, mom and dad, had sex. And so you were part of dad, part of mom, here we are. And that creates this wonderful thing called you. And this beginning of you then creates this thing called time. And before you, time did not exist. And after you, time for you will no longer exist. You return to this space before time. And so that concept that you continue throughout life, that is your sense of self. There's a me that was here yesterday, and there's going to be a me that's here tomorrow. And that me-ness is formed largely by our neurobiology. And so we have an operating system down below our nose. And, I'll give you this metaphor, I've given it a million times. This recording device works very simply. And I am a trauma therapist, and that's kind of the foundation of the understanding about everything in psychology for me. And so we are a biological being, meaning that you're a Homo sapien, you are a monkey. And how we work, this operating system down here, and it is simply a hardware recording device. It is literally hardware, just like a computer has wires and systems. That's what this is. It's a electrical, neurochemical, wires and little gaps, and then neurochemicals tell them to keep going. And more importantly, it's all made up of this DNA. And so every cell in your body has a memory system in it, and that's called the DNA. And this memory system, they used to think DNA was a hardwired or literally unchangeable kind of fixed thing. Is it nature versus nurture? If it's nature, genetics, then you're kind of in it. In the last 15 years, really the last 10 years, we've come to understand it's not fixed at all. Meaning that the DNA in this is interacting with the environment through actually the proteins. I won't go into that, but it is an unbelievably cool, complex system. And so you touch a stove, touch a triangle with these circles on it, boom. What happens is every single wire running from your tip to your fingers, very sensitive up here, run up to this thing that runs down our center line called the central nervous system. What it does, and I use this as a model. So we got this is your spine, you got this brain stem, you got this limbic cluster, 15 major parts of it. And then you got this outside, the neocortex, the new brain, this being the old brain. This thing and this thing is the recording device. So again, dove, it comes right through your, very rapidly to your spine, and the spine thinks for itself. It's a reflex system, meaning that it sends an impulse down into all these muscles and boom, you pull yourself away from it. Reflex, you can't control it, meaning that you put your hand in front of on a stove, it is pulling away without you having to do anything up here. It is hardwired into the system. Interesting things happen when that trauma, I always joke the hippies were right, trauma is recorded in the body, but this recording makes it through a little thing called the RAS, reticular activating system. And what it does, it sends this, holy crap, something really important just happened. This recording device writes a software program. And so that software program records square, 4 circles, then pretty damn permanently baked into the system that every time you walk in to the kitchen and you see this pattern, it can be a 1910 retro wood burner, no electricity needed, or this beautiful glass top with these painted little lines on it. That pattern is close enough to ping this radar, big giant visible radar looking for these patterns, comes into the body and we feel a little bit of that trauma, just a touch of it. And so you go on guard. And, the unconscious is not a mystery. It's right here below the nose. And this giant, unbelievable invisible radar is constantly scanning behind the scenes. They say 95% of the information going through the thalamus, kind of the center walnut in this limbic cluster, is just below our consciousness, meaning that we're not aware of it. So the unconscious is real. It's not some weird thing. It is this wiring system, lizard brainish thing, that is constantly trying to keep us safe, looking for these patterns. When a pattern is matched, we go on guard. Very simple system. This thing then is recording thousands of these experiences, lots of evidence that it goes back 4 generations. As you're sitting there listening to me, think about how old the DNA is actually in your body. 100 million years old. It's been around for a long time. Past lives are real. And so we don't come out, meaning that egg and sperm, we get this information, both mom and dad, that's holding a lot of these patterns. The researcher in University of Tel Aviv, Rachel Yuta, she can predict with 99.9% reliability whose great-great-great-great-grandparents were in the Holocaust, simply by looking at their DNA profile. That is incredible. Think about it. We're a bunch of animals running around this blue dot in the middle of nowhere. And, it makes sense that these recordings, if they're really important, then you're going to be born into a dangerous world. The biology is going to adapt. This thing works very different from this thing. And how does this thing work? This neocortex. And here's where we get back to the picture real quick. This thing is a real-time operating machine, meaning that here's the present moment. This is presence right here. That is where this machine is operating, and it's a lizard brain. My eldest daughter, was actually really good at it. kind of weirdly good at it, catching lizards. And so if you sneak up to a lizard really slowly and you don't set off its radar system, you can grab it. And so that's how this thing works. And so it's a real-time operating machine. And then you got this neocortex. And the new brain, it is a time machine. And so all of that noise in your head and all of these images and all of this stuff going on inside that you are conscious of, that you can listen to all day long, is running these patterns constantly. And what it's doing is really running these software patterns, trying to predict the future. Pretty ridiculous at it, but it's what we spend most of our time doing, is trying to solve problems that aren't actually happening right now. And so how does this fit, and how do these two systems create this sense of self? And that's what this video is about. And so and what is a narcissist? Believe me, we'll get there. The metaphor coming out of my doctoral dissertation was something called self-sabotage, and really points out the difference between these two operating systems and their goal in life. This thing wants to keep us safe. And it's imperative. You know, we would not be on this planet if it didn't really work well, looking for all these pings in our world. It always errs on the side of danger, meaning that you walk into the kitchen, this thing pings the radar, whether the stove is hot or not. And that's the classic Buddha metaphor. You know, is it a snake or is it a stick? We always think snake because it kept us alive. We're a fear-based animal. And that it's working well. This thing up here, imagine cell phones and daydream and think about how wonderful it would be to win the lottery and all these other things. And that is what we tend to actually use as, you know, what we believe is making decisions for us. And so where is this identity? How do we make an identity out of this thing anyway? And so it goes to a very early 2,000-year-old metaphor that they guess. They notice that human beings are very much like, this was coming out of Buddhist philosophy, very much like an Indian elephant with a rider on top. And that rider on top would make decisions and try to control this elephant. But the classic story is the elephant, if you give an elephant sugar, no matter what the little rider up on top does, this thing's going for the sugar and you can't stop it. Actually, elephants often have to be destroyed once they get addicted to sugar because you can't stop them. Second example is sex. You're riding a male elephant and you're up there riding along. Its senses smells the pheromones coming off a female elephant at heat. You're both going for a ride in multiple ways. Third example is beer, believe it or not, alcohol. And if you never do beer, Indian elephant beer, make a mental note. And why? Because if they smell beer and you're going for a ride, they will, you can't control them. So very much like us, and this is, going back 2,000 years, ancient philosophers, no functional MRI, no real understanding of biology, noticed how this worked. And this is why, my doctoral dissertation, I looked at a lot of different things, but one of the simplest examples I can use is this is why January sucks at the gym. Why does January suck at the gym? Because everybody's monkey mind has got temporary control over this elephant, and this elephant is going along for the ride. And you got this, gorilla up here, go to the gym. You may have a cheerleader or two. Come on, let's go and whatever. And that seems to coax the elephant along until what? Until this thing starts to resist. And when that starts to resist, that's what the Buddha called dukkha, or suffering, discontentment. And it's what, freak out, or you lose your marbles. That is what, all this suffering is about. You need to make another video or do another. You got to do your homework. You got to, return the email at work or whatever. And you feel, I don't want it. And you can observe this dynamic between the two, that's a hint to the sense of self. So what is identity then? If you're sitting there, you've never heard this metaphor before. It's actually a really good one, because it is the opening possibly for your first time of self-awareness. What is this self then? Where are you in that? Where's Dr. Doug? Am I all my thoughts and all this hopes and dreams, or am I this actual elephant body thing? Very simply, you're obviously some weird combination of both. And I'll draw that here for you in a second. And, capital A-N-D, double underline, neither. And so that neither part is really the hope I have for bringing that to the world, of waking people up to the possibility that, this thing of consciousness. So we have mind, body, and soul, monkey, elephant, observer, that observer. And believe it or not, somewhere between 80 and 90% of people, it's not really well practiced or even online. There are some people who, none of it. You ask them, do you hear voices in your head? And they're like, what? I mean, they literally don't hear the chattering. My expertise is, the ADD, ADHD spectrum, and the metaphor that I use that, and if you're watching this video, you may be shocked to learn that most people do have a single writer in their head. They have a single thinker. So those with the executive function, not me, not most of you listening probably, but who have a very dominant executive function. And what the executive function does, it tunes information out. So it only tunes into things that confirm what you're thinking. So it makes sense that, they had this one thinker up there, and it's seeing what it sees, and it confirming what it knows. Where if you're like me, or like the people I work with, ADD, ADHD spectrum, we have 7 to 13 monkeys in our head. That noise. And, when I teach people meditate, the first time they calm down, it's like, oh my God, thoughts going layers of thought. That's not normal. That means you're pretty neurodiverse. And so it's a blessing. That'll make sense here in a minute. So what happens? Set the stage, Dad, for really filling the rest of this in. So you had this sense of me, whatever the hell that is, starts here. Actually, it doesn't start till about here. I'll talk about that. Very important. It's called latency. But once it starts here, the monkey mind starts to come online, and you can start to have these narratives in your head that then you have this continuous sense of me through reality. Well, it was yesterday and I like this and like that. I'm probably going to like it tomorrow. And so it obviously working on both of these systems, but it's this continuation of me through time. The end of me, there will be a day when you're no longer here, freaks most people out. And part of our practices and meditation and Buddhism is we often meditate on our own death. And so there will be an end to me, but is it really an end to me? This very simple thing of latency. So we are born way too early. We should basically be in a pouch when we are born. You come out of the chute, you're literally just this little ball of meat for a saber-tooth tiger to come along and eat. And so we are completely dependent on others for our survival. And I'm, did Kathy Kane's and Steve Terrell's, developmental trauma courses over 3 years. Loved it. Amazing. But it's all about attachment. And believe it or not, attachment is the core of all psychology. Core of Zen too. All my practice is about subject and object. And what is this attachment thing? But the most common things recorded in our bodies, these patterns, and they really start pre-verbally, meaning that even before you had verbal skills, the elephant is recording all of these experiences. And so we have these little, on top of your genetics that you came loaded with, you got little ones, some big ones, and it's really this building block of trauma that sets the experience for what we expect in life. We'll talk about ego throughout this, but the ego is really not this narrative or image of yourself. It's really a felt sense in body. It's actually held in your fascial layer. It's really trippy. But this is familiar zone, the zone of tolerance or window of tolerance where we can tolerate kind of how much attachment we have. And that is because it is hardwired into our system. This is somewhere around 2.5, 3, maybe. Some of us get some pretty good language skills. So prior to 3 years old, most of us don't have vivid memories. We may remember some things, but that's because the monkey mind, this neocortex, isn't even going yet. But once it starts, and here's what is all of these recordings down here. So this turns into a big ball of mostly fear and pain. Eckhart Tolle called it the pain body. I like that, actually. It makes sense. Carl Jung called it the shadow. It's the part of us that's unconscious. And what is it mostly? It's mostly our fear of abandonment. And so human beings have our number one fear as a human being is the fear of abandonment. Why? Because we're a ball of meat most of our earthly childhood. And if we're left alone on the trail, someone's going to come along and eat us. And so this up, carry me, hold me, touch me, connect to me, keep me safe, is so hardwired into us that it is. Most of this is abandonment. A little bit of this in here too, mostly abandonment, but it's also things that might eat us directly. You're 2.5 and you're on your tricycle or whatever, going towards the street. Mom's going to, and that's an old joke. All good parents yell at kids when their kids go on the street. And so all of a sudden the street get burned into your memory system. And you know that if you get about 10 feet from it, you're going to go on guard. Good thing to have. And again, that's pre-verbal. And so it is this wiring system, well, things that might eat us, and that's cars or spiders or dogs. Some people have early experience with dogs that are scary, or cats, whatever. But again, most of it is about abandonment. So it's really this felt sense of what. But 3 years old, hopefully the neocortex, again, this is the predictive machine for the future. And then I know that if I'm going to go towards the street, that I might need to be on guard. Maybe I'm looking at my cell phone somewhere along the line, walking, it's 17 years old, walking along, and it's a car. And so we have these other traumas. And you'll see that they're fewer than down in here, because hopefully you're able to predict to not be as traumatized, because you're able to actually keep yourself now safer. Keep this, the radar is out there doing what it's supposed to do. But we have car accidents and early molests, and caregivers don't do what they're supposed to do. And so we have very big biasations of that. And again, you see me really filling in down below. And that's being mostly pained down below this line. And pain is a very important signal. Listen to it. So you go towards the street, it actually hurts. Caregiver that is supposed to protect you doesn't. That is a breach of really this sense of trusting others. And so these recordings, all of this is in the past, is there to what? Monkey mind does something. We see something coming, and we see something coming along that is going to trigger us into these felt senses in the body, a body response. What happens? So we either see it, think it, that comes back through this present moment in an instant. It's actually a 1/7 of a second. They can measure it now really quick. So it's reflex. You have a really negative thought. It is a flash. You have a body reaction. So it comes back here to the past, looks for these patterns that match. And again, hot stove, somebody was supposed to protect me from boiling water. I'm up there doing this. They scream. I pour the water on me. They're complex, meaning that it could have been, dad didn't protect me. I got burned by the stove and, I'm whatever. That turns into this weird neuropeptide soup that gets dumped into the body. And that neuropeptide soup, again, it's a flash, 7th of a second, boom. That neuropeptide soup then turns into sensations. Those sensations come back up into this thing of time, back into our neocortex, and does what? Turns into emotion. And that emotion then, we give it a label and a name and, some picture, whatever, hopefully helps us avoid these negative things in our future. And so this is happening, and this back and forth is happening incredibly rapidly. And actually, it's the default modal network in the brain. It's really the operating system of the head that's connecting all these parts and running around. If you're neurotypical, the default modal network is pretty good at this, pretty good at staying on track, and actually thinks that much narrower, it's my guess, I don't have it, is a much narrower band of actually what your thoughts are about, because you're good at tuning all this irrelevant stuff out. If you're driven like me or have the ADD, ADHD brain, we have 9 to 13 times going on up here, and our default modal network is actually connecting 4 times as many parts, operating 3 times as fast. So literally, where most people that may have 1 thought or 2 thoughts and kind of easy to tune into, we've got, just as you may be very well aware of, a bunch of monkeys throwing shit at each other and going crazy. So our brain is just much more clouded in this. And I'll talk a little bit in another video about identity, but this one in particular. So what happens? Here's the past. This is the future. Is we create an identity out of this. It's a weird biological twist and about how we work, but what do we do? So we got this thing of the shadow back here. I'll call that a very youngin in my understanding. You got the shadow back here, but what do we do with this? This neocortex is actually pretty good at it. It comes up with this person, this image, and Carl Jung called it the personic ideals. And the personic ideal, it's for most people, most people have the executive function of the brain, and they have a pretty cohesive identity. They have a pretty cohesive sense of self, meaning that they're pretty clear about what this is. Carl Jung actually wrote about it. So we've got this shadow here. We got this personic ideal. Personic ideal, PI. Then we got the shadow. And this, very simply, most of us have some awareness or a concept of identity. Of, apparently for those with executive functions, it's pretty cohesive. This is me. Self-esteem is where you like this person. I think I'm good. I think I'm nice. I think I had this and this and this. But the body, or the shadow part of you, the actual part of you that has recorded all these traumas and this felt sense of me, often, and again, it goes to abandonment. So it's the part of me that I don't want you to see. Because if, you see this part of me, all my experiences from the past, you're going to tell me I'm either going to be unsafe or be kicked out of the herd. And so this ego, and that ego, you hear that a lot in psychobabble land. It doesn't mean prideful, that he's full of ego. That is part of the meaning. But in the real Jungian sense, or in the real Freudian sense, or in the real psychology world sense, It is simply that noise in your head and body, a felt sense of meanness. And it is a problem solver. I'll say that again. The ego is a problem solver that is constantly comparing this personic ideal who I need to present to the world compared to actually how I feel about myself in my inner world. And that discrepancy. And there's this thing called narcissism. Carl Jung called this is the lowercase self. And it's really this whole operating system between, and again, it's biology. We got this recording device, the elephant, the monkeys. And so this lowercase self, and what is narcissism then? And this Jonathan Haidt wrote a great book called The Coddling of the American Mind. And it talks about the self-esteem generation. And what is that? Well, we wanted our kids to really think about themselves and feel good about themselves. That's narcissism. It's so people that are very identified with just this personic ideal part of them. And this they're very unaware of. And so it's the example I always use, it's the 29-year-old kid that, wants everybody to think he made it. He's got the flat brim hat. He's got the cool tattoo. He's got the Lamborghini. He's got the beautiful, 23-year-old bottle service girl model. And look at me. This is what I am. And that's a classic. That's a classic description of a narcissist in that they over-identify with this. And so this is, and when you actually question him then on his shadow, it's like, dude, I'm dumb. I think boom, you get defensive. And so you wind up defending this image that I'm trying to put out to the world to varying degrees. This thing they call the narcissistic wound. The narcissistic wound in trauma land can be so big, the narcissistic injury can be so big that it's too intolerable for some people to even look at. And that is where you get this true narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder, to where they are so over-identified with this, and more importantly, they are so defensive of it, and they don't have the insight into the wound. Meaning that they can't step out and look at self. They have very little or no self-awareness. Next part of this, and then this gets really cool here really quick. Because what is the joke about this whole sense of self? What is the joke about identity in itself? Is that this is not real. Not real at all. It is a fabrication, basically, of this thinking machine up here, this future casting machine about who and what do I need to be to never feel again that trauma from the past. And so this split in self, very common, where people are splitting off their shadow and they're over-identifying with this. This is basically how capitalism works. It's how the world works, meaning that, we are told by the man, this is what you need to be. You need the Cadillac. You need this kind of car. And we got these kind of shoes. Everyone's going to think you're cool and want you part of their herd. And that is very appealing to the human species, obviously. But narcissism. And then what happens with the true narcissist, the true narcissistic personality disorder? The shadow is their nemesis, is their fuel. But they don't have that self-awareness. And the other thing, they do something called shadow casting. What is shadow casting? Shadow casting mean they project this out. They put it on other people, meaning that, very simply, I'm this cool guy. You're the piece of crap. You're the part of me, and you have those qualities that I just don't want to have in my world because they're triggering to my trauma unconsciously. More importantly, it's something that I really don't want to be. And so there's this shadow casting they project this emotion now, gaslighting and all those wonderful tricks and tools that they use to get you over here to disidentify with your own sense of identity and over-identify with the shadow. And that's what very trippy experience. If you've ever been around a real narcissist, they will project literally this energetic emotion on you and you'll feel it. If you make an identity out of it, let's go projective identification. It's like, yeah, when I'm around that person, I always just feel like I'm not good enough. What's wrong with me? That's how it's done. And so you start to feel this emotion in your body. It's actually coming from them. So it's a therapist and as somebody who's a trauma healer and longtime meditator and hyper energetically aware, I'm very familiar with this. And so this shadow casting, personic identification, and when you're around a narcissist a lot, boundaries, something I wanted to talk about in this video, the boundaries between emotion and identification with emotion. And so think about a herd of gazelles. You got 100 gazelles in a herd. One of them, they were just like us, the little radar gets pinged. And what's it do? They get scared. What happens to the rest of the herd? Everybody's scared. Whose feelings are they having? And so it's like, well, his and his and his and my big. More importantly, if you're able to actually have this self-awareness and build something called interoception, where you can build some awareness of things going on in your body and meet it with curiosity. Are these even my emotion? Meaning that, you walk into a room and you got your narcissist in there and they got their eyebrow up and they're looking at their phone and they throw you a dirty look and all of a sudden you feel that, ugh. Wait a second, is that me or them? And that capacity to actually step out of this whole experience and observe yourself doing it is the path out of these entangled toxic relationships you may be stuck in. And codependency and all of these enmeshed, boundaryless relationships in your life are really about this shadow. You'll also see this is something that's happening in the world today, as you see this collected shadow, collected pain. And then you have your group of people with this personic ideal identity, meaning that, we're woke or we're Republicans or we're, Trump or whatever it is. And it is this collective pain that they really motivates them. But then what do they do with that collective pain? They put it on to this group over here. And this group over here says, hell no. It's not us, it's you. And so this collective pain war that we're seeing, and if you had our identity, if you were just like us, then we wouldn't have this pain. Well, if you were just like us, then we wouldn't have this pain. And so this battle of blame, you'll see that. Blame going outwards. This is where you go to shame. And that is the tool of narcissists, is to shame you and make you feel like you're doing something wrong or bad. And this becomes the scapegoat. And if you were just like me, I wouldn't feel this pain. Because you're not like me, you're bad, you're wrong. And so blame and shame is the tool of actually the self and this identity. And again, hopefully you're watching this going, what the hell? Because that is this observer. From this level, you're able to actually step back and see, most importantly, that this is unreal. we're a bunch of monkeys, right? We're out on a blue ball hurtling through space at 240,000 miles an hour. Close with this. Some other videos, you'll obviously, I got other videos about trauma. Would be great to follow up with this, really how trauma works, because very simply, pain will continue. This cycle will continue generation after generation after generation after generation after generation. As long as there's this shame thing going on and this blame thing going on, externalizing or internalizing all of this hurt, rather than actually coming back, pain will continue generation after generation after generation after generation until someone is actually willing to feel it. Meaning that someone's actually willing to look at their trauma and remember what the trauma is. It's pain because I, in the past, felt abandoned or experienced abandonment or experienced trauma. And I'll go into the video after this. In fact, I will make that video over here real quick and try to get it up as quick as I can about going back on the chart and really looking at how to deal with this pain as it comes up in the body and not make an identity out of it, not make the sense of self. So this is narcissism. You will come across it. Very common in these days. And all of us have this identification of identity, but being able to deal with your shadow, and then we say, eat your shadow. It's because as you eat this and integrate it, you actually are freed from this entire dynamic of self. That's a teaser for the video coming up. Appreciate it. Enjoy.